How are you tonight? It's truly my pleasure and honor to be here. It's been 6 years since I've been back to Creighton, and I got my foundation and my start in academia here. So it's great to see many of you that I knew while I was here, many new faces. I want to thank Dr. Haas and the honors program as well for bringing me here to speak with all of you tonight. I'm really excited to talk a little bit about what I'm doing in my research, things I'm thinking about, and things our profession of political science is thinking about when it comes to voting. So a little audience participation to start, and I'd really like a show of hands. So how many of you were taught growing up that voting is a good thing to do or something that you should do? Okay, so for the camera, everyone raised their hand. How many of you were taught it's something you shouldn't do or is a bad thing to do? Okay, no one raised their hand, not a single person. Okay? Voting is a norm in this country. We are expected to vote. Okay? And yet, even though many of us do vote, a majority of us vote, not everyone does. Okay? And actually, if you compare the United States in terms of how many people vote in their national elections, we're pretty close to the bottom compared to our peer democratic countries, especially in Europe. Here's a list of the, you can't really see it too well, but the point isn't to see how much people voted, it's to see that the United States falls pretty close to the bottom when it comes to turnout in our national elections compared to many democracies, especially in Europe. This is just presidential election turnout, where we have the highest turnout. We have lots of other elections in this country. We'll have a midterm election this November, and about 40% of Americans will vote in that, compared to 60% in our last presidential election. And if we have off-year local elections where we vote for things like mayor, county assessor, other important jobs, turnout will be about 15 to 20% on average in those types of elections. So why don't people vote, even though there's a norm? Well, the most common answer that you hear, often from political science research, sometimes also from the news media and from activists, is, well, it's hard. Right? This is a line outside a voting station in Phoenix, Arizona, after the last election. People waited multiple hours to vote at one station there. But there's all sorts of other problems. It's hard to know when to register to vote, how to do it, how far in advance of an election you need to do it, where you actually need to go vote if you are registered and allowed to, if you have to carve time out of your schedule, balance picking up kids, balance your work schedule in order to actually make it to the poll to vote. There's a long list of considerations that you have to go through to figure out, well, am I actually going to go and, well, I'd say pull a lever, but it's not 20th century anymore. But I guess to put in the optical scan form into the modern voting machine. We have to talk about how hard it is to vote. And most efforts in this country are around making it easier to vote, changing policies so that it's more convenient for people. We've been doing this pretty much consistently for the last 50 years since the Voting Rights Act of 1965 at both the federal and the state level, with some exceptions. Right? But over that same time period, highlighted in red, 1964 to 2016, voting turnout hasn't really increased in presidential elections. Right? If anything, it's declined or remained steady. So why don't people vote? How can we improve turnout? Well, maybe we would be best off flipping the question on its head, not looking at it from a glass half empty perspective, asking it from a glass half full perspective. Why do people vote? Why is 60% of Americans, despite all the problems that there are associated with voting, making time out of your schedule, making sure you're registered, standing in line for hours in some places, why do people do it anyway? People choose to do it all the time, and it's somewhat shocking that they do, considering the payoff. You get one vote out of 140-some million cast in a presidential election, and the probability that your vote will determine the outcome of the election is about 1 out of 140 of the probability that you'll be struck by lightning this year. Okay? So why do people do it? Okay? Political scientists have a term for this. It's called the paradox of voting. The paradox is that people choose to vote even though it's probably not going to make a difference, and it's kind of hard to do for some people. So why do people vote? Well, why do people do anything? Let's back up a little bit and think about human behavior and the incentives that we have to do some things and not do others. Humans often behave in order to gain benefits that they would not accrue if they didn't act. Okay? So why do we put money in savings accounts or retirement accounts instead of blowing it on cheeseburgers? Okay? It's because if you put money, you gain interest, and over the long term, you'll be much better off for behaving in a way that's fiscally responsible. Okay? Why do we do the dishes? Okay? Sometimes we do things to avoid negative consequences. And what happens if you don't do the dishes? Oh, here's the spoiled arch reference, but that is the answer. Having lived with many guys in college roommate settings, I can tell you that's the answer. So we need to think about incentives, and we need to think positively about why do people choose to vote. And political scientists have done a lot of thinking about this. And the key answer they come up with is, people kind of ignore this probabilistic and rational ways of thinking about voting. They vote because they get what we call psychological rewards from it. We feel good about voting, and that's why we vote. Okay? There are a few different motivations, a few different reasons, and I'm going to share just 5 of them with you. This is not an exhaustive list, but it's a few ways we might start to think about the extrinsic rewards, that is, why we vote to make other people feel good, or the intrinsic rewards, why we vote to make ourselves feel good, and how they can motivate voting. Okay, so we'll start with the extrinsic rewards. So the first reason we vote, we started at the top of the hour talking about social norms. And we vote because we feel like we're expected to vote. Okay? If we do vote, okay, we feel like we've lived up to expectations and we feel emotions like pride. If we don't live up to expectations, we feel feelings like guilt and shame. Another reason we vote is through social pressure. People in a one-to-one setting telling you, you need to go vote. I had one of the aforementioned roommates had never voted before 2016, and he had a particularly persistent girlfriend who hounded him for months and months until he threw up his hands and said, okay, yeah, I'll go vote. So we can persuade people to vote and motivate them through pleasing us, or people can motivate others through pressuring them to please others. A final extrinsic reward is there's some group effort involved in this. And we participate because we're feeling like we can contribute to something greater than ourselves, something that people like us want to achieve. So record turnout among African Americans, for instance, was recorded in 2008 in many places because there was a black candidate on the ballot. Likewise, year after year, some of the people that are most likely to vote are partisans, Democrats and Republicans, because people like them are on the ballot. And so supporting people like you or supporting your group is a good way to get people to care. But there are also a couple intrinsic reasons that I want to talk about, reasons that we feel good about ourselves for voting. One reason is that we feel a sense of efficacy. We feel that despite this political scientist coming up here and telling you you're much more likely to be struck by lightning than actually making a difference in voting this year, you ignore that. You say, I still think I can make a difference. It matters to me that my voice is heard, and it matters that I go out and do this. And if everyone felt the same way, then maybe we could all make a difference. And people can convince themselves of this, and I'm not saying they shouldn't. It is true. And then a final reason that people vote is because they have some sort of personal interest in it. They're intellectually curious about it, they follow it closely, they talk about it with their friends, maybe they even have some material interest in it. Right? Though that is often hard to measure for the individual, exactly what they get out of an election. This can be good, that people are interested in politics, but it can also be bad if we start to treat politics like sports or entertainment. So why is this important to know all the ways that people feel good about voting and why that's important, that's what actually motivates it? Well, if we want to improve turnout, if we want to help people vote that haven't voted before, and especially increase turnout among groups of people who historically haven't been able to vote, then we need to focus more on things like this, motivating people to vote, rather than focusing on why it's so hard or just making it convenient for them. There can be bad ways of trying to do that, for instance, making politics entertainment. But there can be good ways. Face-to-face interaction, convincing people that might not have thought about voting to actually go do it, encouraging people, enforcing norms, and increasing a sense of advocacy in people that don't normally feel that sense. In conclusion, I think if parties, civic groups, candidates and normal citizens want to increase turnout. We should talk less about making it easier, and we should talk more about making people want to vote. Thank you.